The Asics Metaspeed Edge Paris versus the Nike Vaporfly 3. Two of the best marathon racing super shoes that you can buy right now that are a lot closer than I ever would have thought. And which one's going to be right for you is going to come down to the most subtle of details. With the introduction of the Asics Metaspeed Edge Paris, Asics has done something that no other manufacturer has done yet. They built a shoe that is pretty close, almost identical to the Vaporfly from Nike, specifically the Vaporfly 3. Yet, there are still differences between these two shoes, and which one you're going to like is going to come down to preference, but also very, very subtle details. As with all my Versus videos, let's start with the specs. Looking at the Metaspeed Edge Paris, we have 39.5 mil foam in the heel, 34.5 mil foam in the forefoot, giving you a 5 mil drop. The weight, according to Asics and Running Warehouse, which is where I pull all my specs from, is 6.5 ounces or 184 grams. We'll get to the weight in a moment. And that's for the US men's size 9 reference size that everyone uses. Looking at the Nike Vaporfly 3, we have 38 mil of foam in the heel, 30 in the forefoot, giving you an 8 mil drop. Again, the weight from Nike and Running Warehouse is 6.5 ounces and 184 grams. Again, in the standard US men's size 9. Now, one of the biggest questions I'm getting about the differences between these two shoes is the drop. The Nike has an 8 mil drop, the Metaspeed Edge Paris has a 5 mil drop. However, I will say that ZoomX, which is the foam in the Nike Vaporfly 3, is very compressive. So if you're standing in the Vaporfly 3 or you're loading the Vaporfly 3, the drop honestly is probably closer to 6 mil, maybe even 5 mil, because again, you sink into ZoomX. In the Metaspeed Edge Paris, you're not sinking into FF Turbo Plus, which is the foam in that midsole, so that 5 mil drop is accurate. So on paper, it looks like there's a difference between these two shoes, but I don't think there is a huge difference in the way they feel on foot. They're both rockered, they both roll you forward, but they do that in a very different way. And I'm not noticing a big difference between the drop of these two shoes. Now with the Metaspeed Edge Paris, we have a full FF Turbo Plus midsole, which is Asics' new PIBA-based super foam, and it is exceptional. And it has the low carbon plate configuration, meaning the carbon plate is low to the ground in the forefoot and high in the heel. We also have a very generous heel-to-toe rockered midsole geometry in the Metaspeed Edge Paris. The roll from the heel all the way into the forefoot off the toe is very prominent, and you do feel that throughout the entire ride. Whereas in the Vaporfly 3, we have a full ZoomX midsole. Now ZoomX is Nike's premier super foam. It's the one that really everyone still tries to match to this day. And it also has the low carbon plate configuration. However, the low carbon plate configuration, I just call the Vaporfly configuration because that's where it comes from. It comes from the Vaporfly. The Vaporfly is the low carbon plate configuration. And if you want to know more about the differences in super shoe construction, the low versus high plate configuration, there'll be a card on the screen and a link in the description to a video where I go into that in depth. Lastly, with the Nike Vaporfly 3, we have a moderate forefoot rocker. There isn't as much heel bevel in the Vaporfly, so if you're a heel striker, it may not be as smooth, but again, there is a rocker in the forefoot and it does roll you off the toe, though in a very different way, which I'll talk about in the ride section. As I referenced, the plate position in both these shoes is very similar, though there is a difference. If you look at the midfoot on the Nike, you'll see that there is a more prominent drop in the midfoot. So the heel is flat, drops drastically in the midfoot to basically the ground in the forefoot that curls up into the toe spring. Whereas with the Metaspeed Edge Paris, you have a gradual drop from the heel to the forefoot, and then you get the toe spring. Now that second drop in the midfoot is a very specific Nike plate thing, and they protect that with patents, which is why no one is basically copying that in their carbon plates and other manufacturers' shoes, because Nike protects that, because I think that is part of the magic of the ride of the low plate configuration and the Vaporfly in general. That's why no other shoe really feels the same way as the Vaporfly really ever has. Looking at the weights of these two shoes, these are the weights of my 4 shoes between these two pairs. On the Metaspeed Edge Paris, I get my left one in at 186.5 grams and the right one at 185.5 grams. Pretty spot on to what the manufacturer specs there. The fact that these are a little heavier, that doesn't really concern me. And the fact that there's only a gram difference between these two shoes is pretty remarkable because I'm used to 4 to 8 grams differences between shoes lately. On the Vaporfly 3, we have 187.5 and 185.5 between the left and right. Slightly heavier, but again, these shoes are both pretty spot on to what they spec from the manufacturer and Running Warehouse. Looking at the outsole contact patch of these shoes, starting with the Metaspeed Edge Paris, it is a very narrow shoe. As you can see, in the forefoot we have 10 centimeters, in the waist or the midfoot of the shoe we have 5.8, and in the heel we have 7.8. Now in the Vaporfly, we actually have 10.7 in the forefoot, 5.1 in the waist or the midfoot, and 7.8 in the heel. The point I'm trying to make here is that the Metaspeed Edge Paris is a very narrow shoe. I'm not talking about how it fits. I'm not talking about how it fits on the foot. I'm just talking about the contact patch of the shoe. And you do feel that. It does feel narrow. It does feel fairly nimble because of that, but it could be a little bit unstable for some people who are used to running in much wider shoes. Now, I also threw in the Adidas Takumi Sen 10 here because I've always considered that a very narrow shoe, but compared to essentially the Metaspeed Edge Paris, it's not. It's 11 centimeters in the forefoot, 6.8 in the midfoot or waist, and 7 in the heel. So wider in the forefoot than either one of these shoes, but narrower in the heel, which runs in a very specific way. Since these are both race shoes, I think it's really important to quantify the feelings of these shoes. So what I did is I ran the same route with the same kit, the same socks, the same cup of coffee in back-to-back days, so essentially the same conditions, to see how these shoes differed from a data standpoint. Now this 10-mile or 16K route is something I run all of the time. If you follow me on Strava, you'll see me running this multiple times during the week. Some weeks it's the only route that I run. But it's along the rivers, it's very flat, it has some exposed sections, it has some sections in trees, and it's just a good place to lock into paces and really just experiment and feel different shoes. I use this route to test shoes quite a bit. Within the 16K, I have 3 1K segments that I'll do. I don't have them marked, I just sort of know where they start and end, and I usually use those to pick up pace to really kind of, again, compare shoes against one another. So these two runs were not meant to be workouts. They were 60 RPE or 60% level of effort runs. Definitely not workouts. But again, I wanted to run these two shoes through the same effort with the same paces to see how they felt. And the story here from the data is there isn't much of a story because these are very, very close. If we move on to the workout data that comes from my Apple Watch, again, you can pause the screen and look at the difference in the data, but there isn't really a lot of difference here, which is remarkable because I've never had something compared to the Vaporfly as closely as the Metaspeed Edge Paris is. So I think the takeaway from the data here is that they are really similar. There are minor differences. If you look at the overall workout, the distance is the same. The Vaporfly is a little faster at 438 per kilometer average, where the Metaspeed Edge Paris is 442, but that's minor. That's not a huge difference. The power, the cadence, the heart rate, it's all the same. Looking at the 3 segments, now in the Metaspeed Edge Paris, I was dealing with some construction. They were doing some digging that day, so the second segment's a little bit shorter. It is also a little bit faster because I was trying to get to where the construction was and see what's up there because I wanted to make this as consistent as possible. Turns out I was going really fast there, but that I would say is a bit of an outlier because I was actually going towards something. Otherwise, the data between these is very consistent. I think the Vaporfly 3 is a little bit more consistent. There's more of a range in the Metaspeed Edge Paris, but again, that could be my comfort in the Vaporfly 3. I have over 500 miles in multiple pairs of Vaporfly 3s, And when I did this run in the Metaspeed Edge Paris, this was my second run in it. So I had probably about 20K in it. So I'm much more familiar with the Vaporfly 3. But again, the biggest surprise to me here is that there isn't a massive difference in the data. Now, because the data didn't show any real difference, there is a difference. And a lot of that comes down to the fit and feel of the shoe. So I think Asics has probably the best race uppers of any super shoe right now. The Motion Rep technology, or Motion Rep 2.0 in this shoe in the Paris series, is exceptional. It wraps around the foot. It's not too constricting, but it holds you in. The eyelet chain and the lacing system in this shoe is very simple. It works really well. The tongue, while it's not gusseted, doesn't flop around. It just sits on the top of your foot. There's ample padding for a race shoe in the ankle counter, in the Achilles flare. There's a nice pocket here for your heel. Essentially, the lockdown in this shoe is exceptionally good. I'm not getting any sort of shifting of my foot forward or backward or side to side. This is not a wide shoe. It's definitely a race fit. So it's not too tight, it's not too constricting, but it's a very confident-inducing fit in this shoe. Now, in the midsole, this is where that good fit is really important, because FF Turbo Plus is not a foam you sink into. So you always feel like the upper's wrapped around your foot, but then there's a big chunk of foam under your foot. It's very similar to how Lightstrike Pro from Adidas feels if you've ever run in that. You just feel like you're on a platform of foam, which some people like. Now, the geometry of this midsole, the heel bevel and the forefoot rocker are very smooth. So if you're a heel striker, it's going to roll you forward in the forefoot and roll you off the toe. But there's a detail here in the forefoot that I think is really important. The rocker starts about here, goes up smoothly, 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 continues smoothly into the toe bumper. So there's a very smooth arc into the toe bumper, which gives you a very smooth toe off. This shoe very much rolls you off the toe. Additionally, there's a lot of foam here right under the toe. So the toe off is very smooth in this shoe. Now, the Vaporfly has the same sort of forefoot rocker where it's smooth, starts about here, goes smooth, 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 but then it flattens and then it almost folds up into the toe bumper. So the way this shoe feels is you're rolling forward, but then you hit this flat part right here, and it feels like you're digging in. Additionally, there's very little foam under the toes in a Nike shoe, and that's not unique to this shoe. That's sort of every Nike shoe. The amount of foam in the toe area for toe off is very minimal in Nike shoes. So when you engage this flat part of the toe area of the shoe with very little foam, you get a lot of feel. So you can really dig in and push off from the toe in a Nike shoe. Additionally, I think the geometry of the plate where you have this drop here and then you have the toe spring here, both those, when you load the shoe, when you land, they compress out. When you're digging in this toe, they both compress back in. So you almost get this kind of propulsive pop off the toe, which is not present here in the Metaspeed Edge at all. This just kind of smoothly rolls you forward. And I think that's the biggest difference in how these shoes feel. Now, there's one that I prefer, and I do prefer the Vaporfly, but that's because I'm so familiar with the Vaporfly. I have a ton of miles in this shoe. This shoe, I only have 30K in at this point. So I'm getting used to that feel. But I will say, if you run in the Adios Pro 3 from Adidas, this has a similar sort of toe-off feel to it. It's not quite as endless foam, and it's a little bit more aggressive and faster than the Adios Pro 3, but it's that kind of similar up on a platform rolling feeling where the Vaporfly is a rolling forefoot rocker. You're sinking into this foam, you're really flexing the plate, and the plate is allowing a pop off the toe because you can really dig your toe in and get a lot of feel. Some people definitely prefer that. I think I'm one of them. So what's the verdict? Which one of these shoes is better? Well, I don't think it's a simple answer. I will say I still prefer the Vaporfly, specifically the Vaporfly 3, but again, that may be because I'm so familiar with this shoe. I know this shoe. I've raced and run in every version of this shoe since the 4% in 2017. I know the Vaporfly really well. But I think another way of saying which one would I choose is if I was going to go run a marathon in, say, 30, 60 days, And I was going into that marathon feeling really well prepared. I had a really good build for it, and I felt very strong, very confident in my pace. This is the shoe I'm going to pick because I think this shoe is going to reward that better form, being prepared, being stronger, being more powerful, because it's going to reward that with all the mechanics of the plate, how you can dig in off the toe. And I think the efficiency of all that would combine with the softer foam that you sink into, which again, if you're used to it, which I am, is just going to overall add more efficiency. But if I wasn't prepared for the marathon, or I had doubts of my preparation, I would honestly probably pick this, the Metaspeed Edge Paris, because I think the sweet spot in this shoe is much higher. I think this shoe doesn't maybe reward the top end in perfect form, really strong form, as much as, say, the Vaporfly does, but I think it's pretty close. And if I just need a shoe that I'm going to lock in and it's going to help me roll through that marathon, this is probably going to be the option I'm going to look for. And that's one of the differences in those two runs that I noticed, is that this shoe just sort of rolls me along. It helps me along much more. Where in the Vaporfly, I'm working harder. That feels more efficient to me because I'm used to working harder when I run and I race. That's part of racing to me. But if I just want to lock in and let the shoe sort of help me roll through, or in later stages of the marathon when I need a shoe to help me do that, this is probably going to be a much better option. So again, if I'm well prepared, well trained, and I had a good build for a marathon, I'm going to pick this because I think the top end, the efficiency, and just everything about this shoe is going to reward that. But if I'm not up to form, I think this shoe is going to reward that. It's going to help me along. It's going to give me more confidence. And in those later stages when I'm definitely fatiguing, it's going to help me roll through that and stay on pace to what I'm actually aiming at. And that's what really shocks me about both these shoes is, again, the Vaporfly has been the gold standard for marathon racing super shoes for many years. It may not still be that now in 2024 as it was a couple of years ago, but this still is probably one of the best marathon racing shoes that you can buy. But the fact that Asics was able to finally build a shoe that is as close to a Vaporfly as anyone's gotten with a super shoe, with all the right technology, the right feel, still a very different feel, but still very close. These shoes run very similar, is quite remarkable. And I have to hand it to Asics because they've done an amazing job with the Paris update, especially to the Edge model. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.